Hello, everyone. Good night. For your hope in me and to help me create better stories, tell me in the comments where and when you listen to my stories, and get ready to start the story by liking and subscribing. Chapter 1. The Harvest's Gentle Embrace. In the golden hush of an autumn afternoon, where the sun hung low like a ripening pear, the fields of Eldridge Hollow stretched out in waves of amber and rust. It was the year 1348. In the heart of England's medieval countryside, a time when the Black Death's shadow had not yet fully darkened the doorsteps, but whispers of caution rippled through the villages like wind through barley. Here, in this tucked-away vale cradled by chalk hills, much like those chronicled in the manorial rolls of the 13th century, where peasants tallied their yields against the dot. Lord's tithe lived the Weaver family. They were tillers of the soil, weavers of wool, and keepers of quiet rhythms. Their days measured not by clocks, but by the sun's arc and the earth's patient gifts. Ilara, the heart of the hearth, rose with the mist that morning, her bare feet whispering against the packed earth floor of their wattle and daub cottage. The air carried the earthy tang of turned soil, mingled with the faint sweetness of dew-kissed apples from the orchard beyond. At 30 summers, Ilara moved with the grace of one who knew the land's secrets. How to coax rye from reluctant clay, how to mend a loom with flax from the river's edge. Her husband, Thom, a broad-shouldered man with hands calloused like ancient oak, had already ventured to the fields, his scythe gleaming in the first light. Their children, little Mira with her tangle of chestnut curls and sturdy Ben, who at 10 years dreamed of falconry, stirred in their straw pallets. The scent of chamomile from last night's tisane still lingering like a lullaby. "Up, my dears," Ilara murmured, her voice soft as the rustle of drying leaves. "The harvest calls, gentle as a mother's hand. Breathe with me now. In through the nose, slow and deep, tasting the morning's promise, and out, letting yesterday's worries drift like chaff on the wind." The children echoed her, their small chests rising and falling in unison. A ritual born of the old ways, whispered in the Anglo-Saxon leech books of the 10th century, where breath was the first medicine against the chill of fear. They broke their fast with a simple pottage, oats simmered overnight in a clay pot by the dying embers, thickened with dried peas from the previous year's store. No milk today, for the cow Bessie grazed the common meadow, but a heel of rye bread, dark and nutty, dunked in the warm broth. As they ate, Ilara spoke of the day's work, her words weaving calm into the air. "Today, we gather what the earth offers freely, and in gathering, we learn to hold it close, preserving its life through winter's veil. No ice houses for us." Thom swung his scythe in wide, unhurried arcs, the blade singing a low hymn against the stalks. Ben trailed him, binding sheaves with twists of straw, while Mira scampered to the edges, her basket brimming with wild carrots and parsnips pulled from the loamy soil. Ilara oversaw the gleaning, her apron pockets stuffed with herbs, rosemary for memory, thyme for courage, gathered from the hedgerows that fringed the Lord's domain. By midday, the harvest wagons creaked under their loads, drawn by old Ned the ox, whose steady plod matched the pulse of the land. Back at the cottage, the real dance of preservation began, a choreography as old as the Roman villas whose ruins dotted the hills, adapted by Saxon settlers who learned from the soil's own tongue. First came the drying, the simplest spell against spoilage, drawing moisture from the air like a sigh from the lungs. In the cottage's rafters, strung with twine from hemp fields, Ilara hung bundles of herbs, sage leaves unfurling like green flags, their silvery undersides catching the light filtering through the smoke hole. Beside them dangled garlic braids, bulbs plump and papery, warding off more than just the damp. They were talismans against the ague, as Hildegard of Bingen had written in her 12th century Physica, blending faith with the earth's quiet alchemy. The children helped with the fruits, their laughter soft as falling petals. Apples from the gnarled trees, those hardy crab varieties that thrived in English orchards since the Normans brought sweeter grafts in 1066, were sliced thin with Tom's whittling knife, cores saved for the pigs. Laid on rush mats in the sun-drenched yard, the slices curled like pale moons, their juices seeping into the earth. Watch how the sun drinks the wet, Ilara guided, kneeling beside Mira. In, feel the warmth on your skin. Out, let it pull the heaviness away. By eve, the slices were gathered into baskets, stored in the loft where the air stayed dry as a monk's parchment, ready to sweeten winter porridges or chew as trail fare for market days. But drying alone could not cradle the meats, those precious yields from the autumn slaughter. Tom had felled a pig the week prior, its hams now destined for the salt's steady hold. In the scullery, a dim alcove hewn from the cottage's thick walls, Ilara unpacked the coarse sea salt, trucked from the Lyme Regis pans, where evaporation under the sun yielded crystals as pure as prayer. Layer by layer, she rubbed the pink flesh, the salt drawing out beads of brine like tears of gratitude. "This is salting, my loves," she explained, her hands moving in rhythmic circles, the grit warm under her palms. It pulls the water from the meat, leaving no home for the unseen foes that turn good to foul. In the manners of old, as the Domesday Book tallied in 1086, every villain knew this craft. For without it, famine nipped at the heels like a winter wolf. The ham went into an oaken barrel, packed tight with more salt, a lid weighted with stones from the brook. There, it would cure for weeks, emerging salty and firm, to be soaked in fresh water, changed thrice daily, a labor of patience before slicing into stews. Fish from the village weir followed suit, eel and perch, gutted and scaled by Ben's careful fingers, layered in a smaller crock, brining them in a weaker salt solution, laced with fennel from the garden, preserved their slipperiness for Lent's lean days, when flesh was forbidden, but the sea's bounty whispered allowance. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, painting the sky in strokes of peach and lavender, the family turned to pickling, that tangy art of immersion. In a stoneware jar, Ilara layered cabbage from the kale yard, those neat plots of brassicas that fed the poor through the year, as noted in the 14th century accounts of Walter of Henley. Shredded fine with a wooden colander, the leaves went down with handfuls of salt, pressed firm until their own juices wept forth. And now Thom kindled the hearth then, not with roaring blaze, but a low, smoldering bed of oak shavings, smoke curling up like a protective veil. Strips of venison poached discreetly from the Lord's wood, a risk tempered by the family's quiet need, were threaded on withies and hung above the fire, smoking that fusion of heat and haze, sealed in flavor while banishing decay. The air filled with a woody incense, mingling with the damp earthiness of the pickles. Creating a symphony for the senses, Ben fanned the smoke gently with a reed mat, his face aglow in the flickering light, while Mira strung onions like pearl necklaces, their skins papery shields against a frost. Supper unfolded as the stars pricked the deepening blue. A humble board laid on the trestle table. Pottage thickened with fresh leeks, bread from the communal oven, baked that morn in the village bakehouse, where peasants paid a penny loaf tax, and a wedge of cheese from the ewe's summer milk. Fermentation had worked its subtle magic here. The curds pressed in a linen cloth, salted lightly, and aged in the dairy shed, drawing on the lore of monastic cheesemakers who shared recipes in the 12th century, turning milk's fleeting gift into wheels that rolled through seasons. As they ate, stories flowed like the brook outside. Thom recounted the still houses of the abbeys, those purpose-built sheds for drying in shady vales, a luxury the family mimicked with their loft. Ilara spoke of honey preserves, a jar of plums, whole and dusky, submerged in the golden flow from wild hives, a sweetness rare as a fair day in March. Taste the earth's memory, she breathed, passing the jar for a shared spoonful. Let it melt into dreams of spring. The children yawned, eyelids heavy as harvest sheaves. Tom banked the fire, embers glowing like buried suns, while Elera tucked them into beds of fresh straw, scented with lavender from the dried bundles. Sleep now, wrapped in the season's care, she whispered. The larder grows full, the night gentle. Breathe deep, my loves, in the harvest's peace. Out into the arms of rest. Elera lingered by the window, gazing at the moonlit fields, where shadows danced like preserved memories. The day's labor settled into her bones like a warm poultice, each method a thread in the tapestry of survival. Drying's whisper, salting's grip, pickling's tang, smoking's veil, in this quiet citadel of clay. And thatch, the family had woven abundance from scarcity, a lesson as old as the furrows they tilled. And as the wind sighed through the eaves, carrying the faint echo of tomorrow's work, Alara felt her own breath slow, sinking with the hearth's fading pulse. The world outside blurred into velvet, worries dissolving like mist at dawn, guiding her gently toward the deep, restorative slumber, where dreams bloomed like sun-dried fruits, sweet and eternal. Approximately 1,450. For TTS pacing, pause 3 seconds after each sensory description, using a warm, measured tone to evoke the rhythm of breath and harvest. Historical facts, such as Domesday tallies, Hildegard's writings, and monastic influences, integrated as familial lore for subtle education, fostering calm reflection. Chapter 2, The Winter's Quiet Larder. Winter arrived in Eldridge Hollow like a cloaked traveler, blanketing the fields in frost-kissed silence. The year turning toward 1349, as the solstice's short days urged the world inward. Snow dusted the thatched roofs like confectioner's sugar, and the brook, once a merry chatterer, now murmured secrets beneath a thin ice veil. In the Weaver cottage, the air hummed with the subtle alchemy of preservation. Those autumn labors now ripening into guardians against the cold's bite. Alara woke to the pale light seeping through oiled parchment windows, her breath a soft cloud in the chill. The children slumbered on, bundled in woolens spun from the spring's fleece, while Tom snored rising. Alara kindled the flames with dry tinder from the woodpile, faggots bound tight, stored under the eaves to ward off damp, a trick learned from the villain's customary laws etched in 13th century court rolls. The cottage warmed slowly, scents unfolding like a hidden garden, the sharp brine of salted hams hanging in the rafters, the earthy funk of fermenting cabbage in its crock, the smoky whisper of venison strips tucked in linen wraps. Another day in the later's embrace, she breathed to herself, buried in sand since harvest, as advised in a 14th century husbandry treatises of Fitzherbert. They emerge sweet and crisp, untouched by rot. Sliced into the pottage with dried apples, rehydrated in spring water from the well, they sweeten the oats without need for rare honey. A sliver of smoked eel, soaked overnight to tame its salt, 3 rinses in the brook's icy flow, a ritual that mirrored the monastic ablutions for purity, added a silken protein. Its flavor deepened by the oak smoke of autumn. The family gathered around the table, faces ruddy in the firelight. Mira traced patterns in the wooden bowl with her spoon, while Ben recounted dreams of summer meads. His ... voice muffled by the woolen hood. Tom smiled, his eyes crinkling like frost on a pane. "The larder speaks today," he said, voice low and rumbling. "Fermentation's work? That quiet bubbling in the dairy? Cheese from the ew's gift, pressed and aged like the abbey's wheels." Indeed, in the corner stood the cheese press, a simple frame of oak slats weighted with stones, where curds from skimmed milk had been molded weeks prior. Fermentation, that ancient partnership with unseen yeasts, turned fragile milk into firm rounds, salted on the rind and stored on ash-dusted shelves to breathe without molding. Subtly, as in the recipes of the Fourme of Curie from Richard II's court in 1390. Though peasants adapted with goat's milk over cows, these cheeses provided sustenance through Lent, their tang a comfort in lean times. Mid-morning brought the tending of the stores, a meditative period. Round that calmed the spirit, like a paternoster bead slipped through fingers. Alara descended to the root cellar first, lantern in hand, a tallow dip molded from rendered fat, its flames steady as a vesper prayer. The air down there was cool and damp, scented with the loamy promise of buried life. Sacks of dried peas and beans, threshed and winnowed in the barn's loft, their husks rustling like dry leaves. Grains from the tithe barn, rye and barley, dried in the sun's relentless gaze to shatter any hidden damp. Filled pottery jars sealed with beeswax lids, a barrier against weevils that plagued the unwary. "Here lies the winter's bread," Alara whispered, running her hand over a burlap sack. "Dried to hardness, yet yielding to the quernstone, ground fresh each morn as our forebears did since the Saxons sowed their first fields. Upstairs, Tom checked the confit pot, that luxurious whisper. For the poor, pork scraps from the salting, slow cooked in their own rendered fat over a banked fire days ago, now cooled and sealed in a clay vessel. Submerged in golden lard, flavored with bay leaves from the hedgerow, the meat would endure months in the coolest nook by the north wall, a peasant's echo of the elite's roulettes, but born of necessity, as described in the 12th century Dialogus de Scaccario, where even Reeves noted the villain's thrifty arts. Scooping a morsel, reheated gently in the pot, Tom savored its unctuous warmth, the fat melting like a benediction on the tongue. The afternoon waned in quiet labors, snowflakes drifting past the window like errant thoughts. Mira helped Ilera with the sweet preserves, opening the honey jar where plums bobbed like jewels in amber. Honey, that timeless preservative gathered from cloudy hives in the wood. Skeps woven from coiled straw, tended since the time of the Druids, but perfected by medieval beekeepers. Sealed fruits against time's thief. A spoonful stirred into warmed cider from the press, fermented lightly in oaken barrels buried against frost, made a posset that soothed the throat and eased the mind. This is sugaring's kin, but kinder, Ilera said, her voice a thread of silk. No costly white gold from the Genoese traders for us, but the bees' honest yield as in the still rooms of the nunneries, where sisters preserved for the infirmary's peace. Ben, with Tom's guidance, tended the smokehouse, a lean-to shed of wattle, its interior blackened by seasons of careful fires. Hanging there were the last of the fish, cod from the coastal peddlers who brined their catches in barrels rolled inland, traded for wool fleeces. Smoking had deepened their flesh to mahogany, flaky and aromatic, stored now in straw-lined crates to await Ash Wednesday's feasts. In northern climes, as in the Icelandic sagas influencing English shores, such stockfish, dried rigid as driftwood, traveled vast distances, a staple for peasants far from the sea. As dusk gathered, woolen like a shepherd's cloak, the family supped by candlelight. The board held pickled beets, their ruby slices vivid against the trencher of rye, paired with cheese rind crumbled into barley gruel. Salted ham, desalted and simmered with dried onions rehydrated in the pot, yielded tender bites infused with rosemary's piney calm. Stories circled the flame of the freezing nights when, in Scandinavia's grip, fish were speared through ice and left to nature's hoist, a method whispered south by Viking traders. Of the pickling vats in Flemish villages, where cabbage fermented into zesty kraut, sustaining weavers through the loom's endless hours. The fire popped softly, embers settling like stars in ash. Ilera poured elderberry cordial, berries dried and steeped in verjuice, a tart elixir against winter's coughs, rooted in the herbalists. Lore of the Welsh midwife physicians from the 13th century. Sip slow, feel it warm your core, she urged, in drawing the day's quiet close. Letting the morrow wait, patient as seed in soil. The children drifted first, curled in their alcove, breaths sinking with the wind's hush outside. Tom followed, his snores a rumble like distant thunder, far and harmless. Ilara sat longest, mending a sock by the hearth, the needles glide a metronome to her thoughts. The larder, that unseen heart of their world, pulsed with the genius of the humble, root cellars holding earth's cool kiss. Fermentation's bubbly song, confite's fatty shroud, these were no grand inventions, but the slow wisdom of generations, ensuring that even in famine's lean shadow, as the great famine of 1315 to 17 had taught, when wet harvests rotted uneared, the table never stood barren. A yawn overtook her, deep and yielding. She banked the fire, the irons clinking like a final prayer, and slipped beneath the woolen coverlet, warmed by a stone from the embers wrapped in flannel, a bed warmer's simple grace. The cottage sighed around her, rafters creaking, pickles bubbling faintly in the dark. "Rest now," she whispered to the night, to herself. "The stores guard us, full and faithful, into the winter's arms, out into sleep's boundless field." Dreams came then, soft as snow on stubble, fields of endless harvest, jars brimming with eternal summer, a larder vast as the stars. In that profound hush, where breath met heartbeat in unhurried waltz, Ilara surrendered to the deep sleep that mended body and soul, awakening each dawn renewed, rooted in the quiet strength of those who came before. The end.